As we get started, why don't you go ahead and drop your name in the chat and where you're logging in from, um, so we can just welcome everybody. We're having people from all over the country. So I'm so glad you all could join us today. And I'm Michelle Gahee, and I'm the Community Engagement Manager at CoGenerate. And at CoGenerate, we work to bridge generational divides to create a better future for all of us. And I'm also joined here today by my colleague, Duncan Madison, who's going to be running things behind the scenes. And if you have any tech issues, you can direct message him through the chat. And so in today's webinar, which is called Uniting Across Generations to Prevent Targeted Violence, we're going to look at solutions to targeted violence that occurs in far too many of our communities today. And our panelists will be here discussing solutions that they're developing in their communities, and just having a general discussion of some of the things that they have seen that has been working and what they're doing in the programs that are going on for them. And I just wanted to introduce everyone here today. So with us today, we have Joe Bubman, who is the program co-director of United to Prevent Targeted Violence. And he's also Urban Rural Actions Executive Director. We have Logan Grubb. Also, he's from the Bubman County Team Advisor in the Urban Rural Actions UPTV program, and that is the Uniting to Prevent Targeted Violence program. And we also have William Anderson here, who is also a community partner lead with Uniting to Prevent Targeted Violence, and also Amanda Bautista Berguglia, who is also a participant in Pennsylvania in the Uniting to Prevent Targeted Violence program. And so before we start, I just want to go over a few housekeeping items for everyone, just to make it easy for you and hopefully abating some tech issues. So we're going to have a question and A module at the end of the program. And we're going to be monitoring the chat and the Q&A function on Zoom. And we'd love for you to put your questions and add your questions in that Q&A box. But we'll also be monitoring the chat. So if you drop the question in there, we can also find it there. And we would love to encourage you to use the chat box for any comments you have, questions for other participants, and if you want to connect with any of the people on the call or connect with some of your fellow participants. And that way you'll make sure to get your chat to send to everyone so everybody will be able to see it. So just use that everyone function in the chat box. And just an FYI, we are recording this session, and then we'll have a follow-up letter for you, and that recording will be included in that follow-up letter. And also we're going to be including any links we may talk about, any of the programs that are featured here that the participants may talk about, and we'll also give you a transcript of the chat box. So you will be able to track if you connected with anybody and their emails in there that you want to gather. And so we're going to get started. And if you do need automatic closed captions available, they're on there for people who may be hearing disabled or who may need them. But if you like to remove those, just select the hide captions button. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Joe Bubman to get us started. And if you have any direct questions for me or Duncan, just drop them in the chat and we'll answer you directly for any technical issues.
Thanks to CoGenerate for hosting this webinar. Thanks to all of you for joining in for a discussion on targeted violence. We have a great panel here to discuss it. We believe at Urban Rural Action that we need to reduce hate and division in our country, and one of the manifestations of that is targeted violence. We also believe that this is a societal problem that requires all of us to work across age and other differences to solve. So that is why we are implementing a program called Uniting to Prevent Targeted Violence in South Central Pennsylvania. I am the program co-director, and I'm excited to do a quick introduction of the program, and then we will ask a set of questions to Logan, Amanda, and Will. And as we do that, we will be sourcing questions from you all, and looking forward to hearing your thoughts and questions for the panel. So just a little bit about targeted violence to begin with. For us, This is intentional violence against a person or a group of people because of their group identity, real or perceived, where the act of violence is intended to intimidate or coerce or generate publicity about the perpetrator's grievance. And you can see some examples there on the screen. Why are we focused on targeted violence? We believe that if you are Black or you're Hispanic or you're Muslim or Jewish or Catholic or atheist or a member of the LGBTQ community or a member of this political party or that political party, and you're targeted violently or with threats of violence, that degrades our society because it can make entire groups of people feel unsafe because of who they are. It also destructs our social infrastructure. It makes it harder for people to engage civically and socially and build connections and strengthen communities. This is also a problem that is clearly on the rise in our country, sadly. And therefore, this group of community members in South Central Pennsylvania decided this is something we need to take action to address, because this is not something that can just be resolved by some dictate or mandate from our elected officials. This is something that we need to come together on as Americans united by some shared values. The other reason that Urban Rural Action, right, a national grassroots movement focused on reducing hate and division, decided to focus on this is that the perpetrators of violent attacks against people because of their group identity follow an observable pathway to violence, which means that there are opportunities to intervene early on by spotting the indicators that someone might be on that pathway, and then intervening, not with law enforcement because no crime has been committed, but by engaging the social service providers, mental health providers, behavioral health providers to get the person who is exhibiting these problematic signs the help that they need to get on the right track. The goals of this civic engagement program are to, number one, build trusting relationships across ideological, racial, generational, and geographic divides. You can see our wonderful cohort. We call them Pennsylvania Uniters. They're on the right-hand side of your screen, 28 folks across 4 counties in the south central part of Pennsylvania. Second goal is to implement initiatives that reduce the risks of targeted violence. Third is to strengthen threat assessment and management teams. These are multidisciplinary teams at the county level that are tasked with identifying potential threats and then responding to them. Again, not by engaging law enforcement necessarily, but by providing services, helping connect people who are potentially on a pathway with the services, mental health, behavioral health, that can get them back on the right track. And then finally, raise our community's awareness of targeted violence, which we do through public events, public statements, and webinars like this. So thanks again for tuning in. This is a little bit of information about the composition of our 28-person Uniters cohort. You can see in the top left the age variety. We have folks like Logan who are in that 18 to 29 bracket. You can see almost 30% of the group is under 44. 39% are in that 45 to 64 range, and then about a third are over 65. Politically, the group is quite diverse, which is not surprising given the nature of the counties where we're working in South Central Pennsylvania. Left of center folks, squarely in the middle folks, right of center folks. And then in terms of how people self-identify, one of the things that I think you'll notice in that list is that we believe we need to ensure that folks who are often left behind or underrepresented in civic engagement initiatives have a seat at the table. That includes folks who are members of faith communities, people who are veterans, people who don't have 4-year college degrees, formerly incarcerated folks, folks born outside the country, people who don't speak English as their native language, and so on. And about half the group is people of color. Last thing I'll say, and then we'll go to our panel, is that this is a program, we call it a broad program, that is composed of 4 individual projects that are carried out by community members at the county level. So in each of the 4 counties where we're working, 7 Pennsylvania Uniters, those are the community members in our program, are working with a social service organization, including JFT, which is represented on our panel, to implement a targeted violence prevention project. So Logan, Amanda, and Will, our panel, they're all with the Dauphin County team, and they work with Just for Today, JFT, recovery and veteran support services to reduce the likelihood of Dauphin County veterans committing an act of targeted violence. And great to see all the folks chiming in the chat. Keep that coming. We will come back to some questions in a little bit. So we're going to start with our round one, and I'll turn to you, Logan, to just say a little bit in a moment. Sorry, I got overly excited. So just hold on for a second. We'll go to you to say a word about, but I just wanted to show the full team in Dauphin County, right? We have a subset of that team on this webinar today. But you see Kurt in the top left and Pearl at the top in the center, and then Logan, Shane in the top right, Will bottom left, Dave in the middle, and Amanda bottom left. The statements that you see on the screen are the team members' answers to the question, why is it important to you to work across differences to prevent targeted violence? I think those answers are profound. This is a group that is composed of formerly incarcerated folks, older folks, younger folks. There's a mayor in the group, people with lots of experience engaging civically. And I think what unites them all, despite lots of differences, is a common passion and dedication for affecting positive change in their community. Logan, over to you. Can you say a little bit about, as the team advisor for the Dauphin County team, can you say a little bit about what is the project that you all are focused on in Dauphin County?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. I just also want to say it's great to be here today. I'm glad to be with Will and Amanda on this webinar and to be able to share what we're working on in Dauphin County with all of you in the audience. So thanks for the opportunity. So given that Just for Today is a veterans-focused service organization, we are kind of specifically focused on the veteran population community in Dauphin County with the specific goal of reducing the likelihood that veterans commit an act of targeted violence. I'll actually add to that, as we have continued to develop our project and iterate what we're doing and hear from different stakeholders, we've expanded that project goal a little bit, recognizing that veterans are also a population who might be victims of targeted violence themselves. And so we're actually working to both help prevent the chances of them committing an act of targeted violence or being the victims of that. And our basic theory of change is if we can connect the service providers, if we can connect veterans with service providers in Dauphin County, who either they maybe are not aware of, don't know how to access, or don't know exist, then we can help to reduce the chances of them either being a victim of or causing an act of targeted violence. And I'm happy to share that just last evening, we had our first constructive dialogue workshop. So this included not only members of the team here who are on the call today, but also social service providers and veterans in that. We had some mental health professionals. We had someone from an institution of higher education. We had someone who works law enforcement adjacent in a program called a co-responder program. And we also had an organization that does dog services. So connecting veterans with support animals. So it was great to see the work that we've been doing over the past several months leading up to this and really thinking about the ways to dig into this challenge, kind of that come to fruition. And we're looking forward to having more of those workshops in the future.
Excellent. Thanks, Logan, and congrats on the successful workshop yesterday evening. And great to hear about the range of service providers that were present. Will, I'd love to bring you in. You're on the board of JFT. You are the community partner lead for the Dauphin County team. I'm wondering if you could say a little bit about the connection between Just for Today, recovery and veteran support services, and this program, which is focused on preventing targeted violence, and how your organization is involved in the effort that Logan just described to connect veterans and social service providers and strengthen collaboration skills among that group.
Well, okay, Joe, as you mentioned, it's veteran support services. JFT, we provide a wide range. We have PTS support groups. We help them receive benefits. We participate in vet courts. Anything that we can do to help vets, we try to do. And this is just another avenue, another way that we can help vets. sadly, 10 of our deadliest targeted violence and mass shooting incidents were perpetrated by veterans. And so it's something that we believe that we have to, sort of be on the lookout for. And because, it's a peer group, a peer support group, and it gives us an opportunity to perhaps observe some things in the very beginning and help prevent it. And as far as what our project, all of our vets we have a veterans coalition in Dauphin County. A lot of the service providers were parts of that group. And the project was to strengthen communication between those organizations and our vets. I think that's a very worthwhile endeavor. And I was happy with the way things went last night.
Excellent. Thanks, Will. Amanda, let's bring you in. You are a member of the Dauphin County team working with Will, Logan, and other team members. You have been involved in a whole range of community activities over many years, involved in lots of different organizations. How did you come to be involved in this program? And perhaps more importantly, why did you decide to commit to what is an 18-month civic engagement initiative? And if you could just, for our participants in this webinar, just provide a little bit of color of like, what does it mean to be a Pennsylvania Uniter on the Dauphin County team? What's that experience like for you?
Okay, I'll break it down a little bit. So my background is mostly criminal justice. I was a Dauphin County Judicial Center officer, which most people would recognize them as like a booking officer when they first come in. So I've seen many people who suffer or experience mental health or just committing crimes. And then as I've progressed after COVID, I became part of my children's school, which is Reach Cyber Charter School. And even there, we see that there's a lot of students, that experience issues with mental health as well. And then within the community, I serve on several different boards. One of the biggest ones, and they were there yesterday as a service provider, is NAMI Dauphin County. It is the National Alliance on Mental Health and Illness. And so our president was there to join us yesterday, which was very awesome. I was very appreciative. And with that, I really focus a lot of everything that I do to make sure that people of color and minorities, especially those that don't speak English, get the services that they deserve. And if they need them, they get the services. So with my current position, we have, it's a cyber charter school, and there's like 46 different languages spoken. And I try my best to try to make sure that if there are any parents or anyone that need resources to communicate, and find somebody that can communicate in their language other than Spanish. If it's Spanish, then I handle that. How I got introduced to being a PA Uniter, one of our amazing people who are on our team, Miss Pearl Sweeting. She is a retired Pennsylvania state trooper, and I've known her for at least 18 years or so. And she recommended, hey, there's this thing, you like this organization. I think you'd be really interested in it. And she gave me more of an insight, and it was right up of, what I do and what I'm very passionate about. So I reached out to become a PA Uniter. And as a PA Uniter now, I've learned, can I say what I've learned so far as a PA Uniter? Is that okay?
No, of course, Amanda, please do.
Okay, so one of the biggest things that I have learned through this is that I've learned to pause and really try to take in all of the different personalities and the different perceptions of everyone in our group. And I've taken that with me in everyday life conversation. So being a PA Uniter has really taught me to take a pause, really listen. And that was, something that I've really had to learn was as in that criminal world was like, hey, this is what I said, this is how it goes, this is what's going to be done. And I don't need to really hear that other part of what you need to say because I still have stuff that I need to get done. So as a PA Uniter, I've learned that we're all very different. We come from different perceptions and different opinions. And I've really learned to become that active listener and then just checking how everyone's perceptions and their views have been communicated, and learning how to like accept it. I may not agree with everything, but I don't want to be dismissive in any way. So I've really learned to take a pause and not try to show that I've been dismissive in any way, and just appreciating everyone.
Thanks so much for sharing that, Amanda. And it underscores one of the key challenges in our country that we're trying to address through this program, which is political polarization, the dehumanization of people who think differently than us. It would be really easy and a lot easier to sort of form a cohort of uniters who all have the same ideas about action that should be taken. And it's a lot harder to form a politically diverse cohort and then to engage with those people and try to reach consensus on action that needs to be taken and then carry it out. And so the skills you're referring to of collaborating, engaging in constructive dialogue, listening patiently and actively to perspectives that we might disagree with, and then finding a way to, see where we can reach common ground and move forward, and respect where we have a different understanding, a different perspective rather, on issues. So thanks for highlighting that, Amanda. So we've talked a little bit about sort of the what. What is this program? What is the Dauphin County team doing to strengthen relationships between veterans and service providers and support veterans as they navigate life challenges? Let's now turn to why the focus on targeted violence. And Logan, I want to put up on the screen your answer to the question of why is it important to work across differences to prevent targeted violence? And you said, I hope to show that young people play a vital role in helping prevent targeted violence. And I'm wondering if you could just say a little bit more about why it's so important to you that our community and our country see the positive contributions that young people can make on this issue.
Thanks, Joe. So I think part of the reason that is kind of the passion that brings me to this work is because targeted violence is such a nuanced and entrenched issue that cannot be solved by any one person. And I think that more and more we are seeing that younger people are potentially being perpetrators of targeted violence. So I think bringing them into the fold is one way to show that we appreciate their perspectives on these challenges. And I would add that I think we are also inheriting some of the work that needs to be done, that I think many of us are uncomfortable with, right? We don't want to just be passive participants in seeing these acts of targeted violence continue to increase. Many of us want to be involved in that work. So many of my former classmates were so politically involved, and I think people are starting to see a little bit of a frustration with that as well. And I think the beauty of our work is, while political polarization is a part of our conversations, that our work is grounded in nonpartisan, thinking and nonpartisan action, right? That we are trying to move maybe beyond what is happening in political spaces to address challenges at a local level, because I think that's where a lot of positive change can be made. And I do think that young people have an interest and a role to play in that.
So it sounds like you're saying, while there might be differences on national political issues, there can be common ground when focusing on local issues, and young people have inherited this problem of targeted violence and want to be part of the solution. And they might be more motivated to engage when they're right at the table and it's a nonpartisan effort and they can just contribute without sort of being labeled as affiliated with this group or that group. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think you've captured it well. And the piece that I would also add to that is, I think there are a lot of young people who, I think myself included, are always looking for their community, whether that be their physical community or their chosen community. And when they find it, they want to be invested in that, right? And so, whether your chosen community is where you're at in your undergraduate life, where it's where you choose to move, or where it's where you grew up, people have an investment in seeing those areas thrive, again, because they are maybe going to be there for decades to come. And so when you care about a community, I think you want to see it thrive, and targeted violence works against the thriving of communities.
With that, I actually want to go to Amanda next, and then we'll go to you, Will, because what you just said, Logan, sort of dovetails with Amanda's answer to this question of why is it important to work across differences to prevent targeted violence? I'll read the whole thing. Appreciate our differences, educate through experiences, respect one another and our opinions, all while embracing change and spreading love. And then you end with, we all want to belong somewhere. And so when I hear Logan talking about the importance of community, I hear belonging. And I'm wondering, what's the connection you see between belonging, feeling welcome, feeling included, right, as opposed to marginalized or excluded? What's the connection between that and targeted violence as an issue?
So I think that when we have that sense of belonging, kind of going off of what Logan had just said, was that within that community, you want to see that community comes together, and they will, and they'll either participate in helping to reduce or acknowledge what could be a potential issue of targeted violence. But on the flip end, if I'm part of like the Hispanic community, I want to see my other fellow Hispanic community thrive, and to help them get the resources that they need to help be successful, or just to, if they are facing something, or something is challenging for them, to help provide them and assist them with something to try to make it easier to give them the resources that they need.
Thanks, Amanda. Will, let's go to you next. As we said earlier, you are the community partner lead for JFT. You serve on the board. You also are a veteran who served our country in the armed forces. Why is it important to you to take action to prevent targeted violence?
Well, first, because I belong to a group that's been a victim of targeted violence. I have people that are close to me that belong to other groups that have been targeted. I have a daughter that works in education. She's already had a concerning situation that, sort of touches on this subject. I guess when the problem gets close to you, there's more of an urgency to look for a solution. So right. I guess that pretty much explains it for me.
And do you think, Will, that this is, I think I maybe know how you'll answer, but I'm curious anyway, if you could say more about it. What is the power that we community members have to make progress on this issue? Because the scale of it is so broad. It's even, right, it's very far reaching. It's even touched your own family. So what's the opportunity here for us as community members to make progress on this issue that you see?
Well, one of the things I've learned about being a part of this is it's a thing called a pathway to violence, which means there's an opportunity to identify problems and intercede before it becomes violent. The more eyes you have on this, I think the better opportunity to identify these problems and intercede. So I think that's what this program does. It widens everyone's awareness, and that helps. That has to help if more people have eyes on the problem.
I love that, Will, because I think one of the biggest misperceptions about targeted violence, and based on how it's often characterized and talked about publicly, often in the media, is that it's senseless and it is random. But in fact, it is planned. And as you say, there's this pathway to violence that starts with some grievance, could be a set of grievances relating to broken relationships or a traumatic job loss, could be substance use, could be a whole range of factors, including mental health challenges. And from a grievance, there becomes, right, this ideation step, and then planning and research, and eventually preparation. And in almost every case of targeted violence, the perpetrator confides in someone else, and sometimes publicly on social media. But in other cases, they at least tell someone what their intentions are. And therefore, as you say, Will, there's a real opportunity, if we know what to look for, to be able to take some action. And if we know who are the entities within our broader community who we can engage, again, not involving law enforcement necessarily, but involving the social service providers that can customize their services to meet the specific needs of someone who is on the pathway that you described. So thanks, Will, for mentioning that. We're going to move to our third and final round of formal Q&A. Now that we've talked about what is this program, what is the Dauphin County team doing, why are you all focused on targeted violence? Now we're going to talk about the age differences across the team and how that plays out for you all. So Logan, you've been involved in several urban rural action programs, not just this one, that bring together folks across age differences to develop relationships, collaborate more effectively, and then solve problems. And I'm wondering, can you describe for us what you see as a misperception that us older folks have about working with youngers, or a misperception that olders have about youngers in general?
Sure. So I'm cautious not to paint in broad strokes, but I do think, because admittedly I share some of these thoughts myself about my own generation, that there can be a real or perceived level of maybe selfishness or apathy when it comes to problems beyond your own worldview or what's not in your immediate concern. And while I do think that there is some truth to that for some people, I would certainly expand that to say that I think that there are a lot more challenges people are facing today. I think particularly in my generation, I think given that I'm only a few years out of undergrad, I think one of the things that my friends talk about not infrequently is, a lot of the college debt that we carry, right? That a lot of us want to be part of this experience and feel a value in it, and that is a significant investment that many of us might carry for years or decades. In terms of misperceptions, I would actually, one of the programs that I would turn to that I've been fortunate enough to be involved in is our past work with college students. So those programs were unique in the sense that it was less intergenerational in that, but it was more the urban-rural divide, bringing together college students in an urban institution and a rural institution to collaborate on challenges of food insecurity or insecurity to kind of basic needs. And what I saw through that work, helping to support my peers, is that there was a real investment in being a part of the solutions here. Is that even amidst a rigorous undergraduate schedule, people wanted to take the time to help people access the social services that they need, or find places where they can connect to food banks or to organizations who are helping to provide the basic needs that so many of our fellow citizens just don't have access to. And so I would say that young people want to be a part of that process. And if you give them the opportunity, I think a lot of times you will be impressed with what they're able to do and the unique solutions that they're able to come up with.
I love that answer. I mean, it's a strong refutation of the sort of slacktivist generation caricature. And the thing I appreciate about that answer is that one success factor in engaging young people is not just dictating to them the action they need to take, but you said involving them in the process so that they can come up with solutions that they want to implement and that they think will be impactful. Let me go to you, Will, and the question I was going to ask is very similar to what Stephanie put in the chat. So why don't we reward Stephanie for her engagement? And I'll pose the question this way. What are the generational divides that you're encountering in this work, and how are you bridging them as one of the olders on your Dauphin County team?
You know what? I don't know if generational divide is a good way to describe it. those cliches don't really seem to, present themselves. One of the original questions had something about, opportunities and challenges with dealing with folks across generations. I found it to be mostly all opportunities. My form of conversation had always been, debate. And this way of talking is completely different. It's constructive listening. And I believe old dogs can learn new tricks, but to be able to look at how some of the young people do this form of listening so effortlessly, it's a good example, and I learned from that. As far as challenges, there are certain challenges dealing with any diverse group of people, and as far as cogenerational, nothing really stands out any more daunting dealing with the youngers than any other diverse group.
Thanks, Will. I mean, what I take from that answer is that whether you're working across generational differences, political, racial, religious, what's important is the way you're working on a team. And the constructive dialogue model that you were referring to prioritizes listening to understand, and rather than just asserting our own view. And that type of process for how you work together means olders can learn from youngers, youngers can learn from olders, and white Americans can learn from Black Americans and Hispanics and Jews, Catholics, Muslims, etc. And it's the process that's really important, and that framework needs to be in place. So, because as you say, it's always going to be challenging to work across diverse teams. So,
and it's getting better, Joe.
Well, thank you, Will. And let's pose the same question to Amanda. And we'll use Will's framing around challenges, opportunities. You work with olders on your team, you work with youngers on your team. What are the challenges and opportunities that you have experienced?
So I would start with like the opportunities, because there's really no challenges that I think we have. We are a really great team. I think a lot of the opportunities, especially with Will, because he is a veteran and because he has that insight, I can't sit there and say, oh, I understand what you are going through. And I know that, right? I'm there, and I appreciate when he speaks and when he's sharing his experiences and what other experiences that other veterans may have. And I take it, I soak it in, we all soak it in, and then our passion has become, okay, what can we do together to help get the veterans to the resources and anything that they may need to help live and get through, daily life. I really, really love when he tells us, and just shares his insight, as well as our other orders. It's a really great group. The only thing I would ever say maybe a challenge was some of the orders don't particularly like doing Zooms, right? So we've made it we meet up in person. And so we have alleviated anything, so nothing can be miscommunicated or misconstrued. So we really meet in person, and we make it a point, and we have all dedicated that way. Now, if somebody can't, show up, well, then they make it a point to follow up and to get on the same page. So that would be the only thing. The younger ones are more tech savvy. They're more into, it's okay to just pop in and do a Zoom this. But some of the olders are like, I prefer to be in person, and that's absolutely okay. So I don't take that as a challenge. We've adapted, and it just makes us stronger. And we've become very successful in doing that.
Thanks, Amanda. And great to hear about the team chemistry and the emphasis on accommodating different preferences around communication, and also prioritizing the social connection that is gained through in-person meetings. We want to once again encourage questions that you all might have. We're going to go to Reginald's question first. And again, please feel free to submit these. Reginald had a question that was really about acknowledging that there are lots of incidents of targeted violence nationally. And Will, you talked about incidents carried out by veterans, incidents of targeted violence. And the question was about, what are you seeing locally in Dauphin County and maybe South Central Pennsylvania more broadly. And I wonder if one way you might answer that, Will, Amanda, Logan, is by talking about what you learned from the threat assessment and management team led by Chief Warner, who you met with over the past few weeks. Because, and just for our audience, right, you all are implementing a project that's about connecting veterans and service providers, but you're also supporting the county level threat assessment and management team, whose job is to identify potential threats and to help manage them. And you're playing a bit of a role of community liaison, helping that threat assessment and management team better engage the broader community so that the community is aware of this concept of targeted violence and can potentially identify threats themselves. So, Will, let me turn to you first. Could you maybe share, if not incidents of targeted violence in Dauphin County, at least the types of threats that the threat assessment and management team is focused on based on your conversations with that team?
Okay, well, when we met with them, they had a real diverse group. They had folks from law enforcement. They had people from children and youth. They had folks from crisis management. I don't really know of any incidences lately of threats of targeted violence in Dauphin County. I just see the potential in this partnership. With the groups that we met with last night and in our future project to connect the public, there are all service providers, and this is just in relation to vets, but they're all service providers that work with veterans in all different capacities. What I was saying earlier about, more eyes help identify the problem, I think that's probably where the partnership will have its best effect. You'll have all these service providers seeing a large cross-section of the veterans in Dauphin County. And if any problems or anything's picked up or noticed in those areas, then you'd be able to contact with the TAM team and have it dealt with, accordingly, or at least addressed. So I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, absolutely. Amanda, Logan, anything you want to add on how you see the danger of targeted violence or the risks of targeted violence in Dauphin County?
So I think, as you alluded to, Joe, this TAM team, as we've been talking about, is still fairly nascent to a lot of people. I think it's a fairly unknown or ununderstood resource. And their work mirrors a lot of what we're doing in that it's a very diverse cross-section, as Will described, of service providers who are meant to who are equipped, either because of the services they offer or the experiences they have, to be able to address someone on the pathway to violence with whatever services they need. And, when we were able to have earlier in our program, a conversation with some folks at DHS who came and gave us a community awareness briefing, it really broadened my horizons to what we're defining as social services. Because I think we often think about those as the people who are providing food or housing or mental health services, but that also includes faith groups. It includes arts organizations. It includes organizations that are, community organizations that are bringing people together for a variety of reasons. That some potential identifiers of someone who has targeted violence, loneliness is certainly one of them, right? People who feel isolated are at an increased risk of committing targeted violence because they don't feel understood or accepted. So I think that what the TAM team is focused on right now is addressing issues in schools, because the schools seem to know about this entity, and the counselors are kind of connected to it. But I look forward to, in future, when we have our public event, of really spreading awareness of the resource that exists for people in Dauphin County who might know someone or are feeling like they're seeing concerning behaviors exhibited, but don't know where to turn to because they don't want to get someone in trouble with the law who has not committed a crime yet. So. that's what I'm looking forward to in terms of our continued engagement with this team.
Yeah, thanks, Logan. And you mentioned the broad range of service providers and social service providers. One of those groups is mental health service providers. And there was a question from Stephanie about how mental health challenges play out within the community, both for the veteran population and non-veteran population. And I'm wondering, Will, you would be best positioned to answer this as a board member of Just for Today, Veterans Support and Recovery Services. What have you seen around mental health services, mental health challenges among the veterans that you work with through JFT, and anything you could add about how that plays out maybe among non-veterans who you support through your substance use recovery services?
I mean, they're actually pretty similar. The only difference is, veterans sort of consider themselves a unique group. I don't know if it's justified or not, but we tend to work better just when we talk amongst ourselves, And I think that's probably what poses the biggest challenge, as far as I can see, is that they're reluctant to reach out for help and they're reluctant to talk to people outside the veterans groups.
And how do you try to overcome that reluctance to engage with, say, service providers who maybe are not veterans themselves? How do you overcome the reluctance of veterans to engage with folks who are not veterans and share that they maybe have a challenge that they need help addressing?
That part's actually pretty difficult. That's why luckily we have a lot of service organizations that do service vets, because that way they do have some groups, a wide range of groups actually that they can talk to. I mean, it's a hard thing to do. Logan and I had some conversations earlier about getting vets involved. And whenever I've tried to include them in some of our projects, that was always the first phase, was trying to feel them out on how open they would be and taking, and participating in some of these projects. And we were always met with a certain level of resistance. So that's a problem that we'll always have to address.
And I would,
Thanks so much. Yeah.
I would piggyback on that and say that in terms of the context of this audience, that is actually one of the generational challenges we do face, and that we've had conversations about as a team, that different generations of veterans have a different willingness to want to be involved in these organizations or this type of work because of their lived experiences. And so we've tried to think consciously about how to engage them and share that when we are having constructive dialogue workshops, it's never meant to be placing them in a vulnerable space, that we're not asking them to come just share their story, that there's a mutual sharing of understanding that's meant to be happening there. It's not a parading around of someone's life experience.
Let me ask a follow-up there, Logan, and then Amanda, I want to bring you back in. So Logan, you talked about differences across generations of veterans. What are those differences in terms of their comfort level engaging on these types of issues that you've experienced?
So I would say that this is based on a conversation with Will, so Will can certainly check me on this, that when we talk about maybe veterans who were from the Vietnam era, that is a group that has a tendency to be more insular, right? They might be willing to talk with each other about their lived experiences, but beyond that community, there might be a resistance. But people who are maybe recently returned veterans, who have recently been deployed, or who are in a younger demographic, there might be more of a willingness to engage. And part of that might be because our society is changing to be more accepting of having open dialogues about mental health challenges that people are facing, that the diagnosis of PTSD is not a weakness or something to be shied away from, that it is something that can be helped and treated, that there are resources that exist, and that people don't need to face those challenges alone.
Will, anything you want to add on that?
No, actually, Logan was, pretty spot on. I'm from the generation of Vietnam era veterans, and they're just a lot, more closed mouth. I don't know if the stigma of mental health is different generationally, but the older guys tend to be reluctant to speak outside the groups, and it gets a little better, as the different conflicts and how recent that they happened.
Thanks, Will. Thanks, Logan. So Amanda, we have a question from Joanne. I want to give you the first crack at sharing a perspective on it. The question is, do you see people who were put on the pathway to violence because of outside agitators trying to increase divisiveness via social media? Do you have any thoughts, Amanda, that you'd like to share on that question?
As far as the veterans are concerned, or like
just more broadly in the community. So we've been talking about the pathway to violence and how someone might start by having a personal grievance, and then ideating about violence, and then doing some planning and research, and then moving on to preparation, and usually telling other folks what their intentions are. There are all these, right, and I should say that we have partnered with News Literacy Project in this program to train our cohort on how to detect misinformation and disinformation. And I think what Joanne is referring to is some of these outside agitators who are permeating disinformation on social media and potentially influencing people to maybe demonize or hate people from different groups. How does that play into someone moving on a pathway to violence?
I think that social media plays a big role. It does influence a lot. I do think that some people in our community feed off of it a little bit, and others may not think that that individual is serious about committing it. I've been a part as a victim of some targeted violence, and I feel as if those individuals were big into the social media, I think it would have been perceived as, oh, it wasn't a big deal, but on my end, it was a huge deal. So I think that social media and even our, like the news, the way it's transpired through social media, the way that it comes, the wording and the way they heighten by just giving a name of a perpetrator, that boosts their confidence to want to keep going. That's why a lot of them do not put information in as much. But I do think that social media plays a huge factor in it.
Thanks, Amanda. And let me suggest that we wrap with a final question, which is a great question to end on, which comes from Libby Steger. Hello, Libby. Thanks for complimenting Logan, Amanda, and Will, and the power of this collaborative initiative. Your question speaks to the fact that this is a program in a narrow geographic area in South Central Pennsylvania, and yet this is a societal problem. And so the question is, what advice would you have? What's one piece of advice that you all would offer to individuals or nonprofit organizations or members of coalitions that want to work across differences to prevent targeted violence in their own communities? What's one piece of advice you might offer? And just whoever wants to go first can jump in.
I'll go. Not to just assume what their perception or what's gonna, not to shut off what they're gonna say. Go in there open-minded and listen, and actively listen to what they say. Because I learned through this, I thought one way, and the whole conversation after really listening took it to a whole different perception and how I should approach, and not just being where I feel like what my answer is or my feelings are exactly what it should be, and it's not.
Amanda, I'll connect it to something you said earlier, which is the way social media can distort our perceptions of the other side or people from other groups. You've spoken about the power of connecting in person, entering with an open mind, being curious, and listening rather than assuming someone's intent. So thank you for highlighting that. Logan, it looks like you were maybe going to jump in. And we'll give you the last word, Will.
There's a quote by an anthropologist, Margaret Mead, that I often think about when it comes to our work, and it's never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. And I think about that as a reminder that local initiatives and things that happen at a local level is where real change can be made. That I think that is actually where change can trickle up. It's helpful to be able to have interventions that people are invested in locally because they feel like they can be involved. And I also think from a strategic standpoint, it helps you test things to see does it make sense for this kind of initiative to be scaled up? If it works in Dauphin County, does the frame work in other places? And you certainly always have to adapt to the different context and locations. But I think that we would find if we would do this work in any county in Pennsylvania, that there would be an interest and an investment in bringing social service providers and veterans together to create better understanding.
And that reminds me, Logan, that we should note that this program is funded by the Department of Homeland Security. It comes out of their Targeted Violence and Terrorism Prevention grant-making mechanism. So this is a grant-making opportunity that's available to lots of different entities, 501c3s, state, municipal governments, tribal entities, and there's a lot of funding out there to support efforts that are undertaken to address this issue because of the scope and the severity of this issue. Will, last word on a piece of advice you have for folks who want to do something in their own communities on this issue.
I don't have a whole lot to add. Just pay attention to what's going on around you and your communities and get involved in any way you can.
Thank you, Will. And maybe we can end by putting into the chat the URL for Urban Rural Action, which is the letter U, the letter R, action.org. We're always looking for ways to expand the impact of what we're doing. So if you're intrigued by what Logan, Amanda, Will have described today, and you want to get involved yourself in some way, we invite you to do so. We invite you to reach out to us. We really appreciate you all listening in on this conversation, but also chiming in with your comments, your supportive additions, and your questions. So it's been great being with you all today. Thank you, Duncan, for putting that into the chat. And I think I will turn it back to you, Michelle.
Right. Thank you all for that very insightful webinar. I really love some of the ideas. And also, even with the last 3 follow-ups of concrete ideas, we'll include all of those. Also in the follow-up letter, we'll also include video and links to all of these organizations, including Duncan and I's email address, so you can follow up with either of us. And Duncan's going to drop a very quick poll right now. So if you could please just participate in this really helps us shape our webinars and put on webinars that are really interesting and pertinent to our audience. So thank you so much for that. And for those of you who are interested too in bringing more cogeneration to your work around this issue, we have an upcoming CoGenerate 101, which tells you a lot about the organization, but also gives a lot of practical tips how to build natural cogeneration within all of the projects that you may be working on, bringing all of the ages together to really help build and solve some of these big social problems. And that is coming up on January 17th. 12 p.m. Pacific time, 3 p.m. Eastern. And you can go to our website at cogenerate.org to sign up there and for any upcoming events and other webinars we have that you may be interested in. So looking forward to seeing some of you on some of our future webinars. And again, maybe Duncan and I will see you in January at CoGenerate 101. So thanks again for joining us, and the follow-up letter will be coming your way within a few days with all of the information and the recording from this webinar.